Siwoo Park was about to ask the love of his life to marry him when he found out everything about her was a lie. He was sitting across from Mary Caldwell at a private rooftop restaurant in Beverly Hills. The kind of place where you needed a referral just to get a reservation. The kind of place where the menu had no prices because if you had to ask, you did not belong there. It was their spot. They had been coming here once a month for the past year, always the same corner table overlooking the city lights, always just the two of them. Mary was laughing. The waiter had just fumbled the pronunciation of a Korean dish and tried to recover with a joke, and Mary had thrown her head back with that full, generous laugh that had made Siwoo fall for her in the first place. Her brown skin glowed warm under the string lights. Her dark curly hair was pulled to one side, falling over her left shoulder. She was wearing a simple black dress, nothing flashy, and still she was the most beautiful woman in any room she walked into. Siwoo had known that from the moment he met her 18 months ago. The ring was in his jacket pocket, a 3-carat oval diamond set in platinum. He had picked it out himself, not through an assistant, not through a jeweler's recommendation. He had walked into the store in Manhattan and spent 2 hours choosing it because Mary deserved intention, not delegation. Tonight was the night. He had rehearsed what he was going to say in his head 3 times on the drive over. He was not a man who got nervous. He ran a billion-dollar company. He sat across from investors and politicians and power brokers without flinching. But tonight his heart was beating faster than usual because this mattered more than any deal he had ever closed. Then June appeared. Jun Hyo was Siwoo's second-in-command, his right hand, his shadow. June had been with Siwoo since they were teenagers in Koreatown, back when Siwoo's father was still alive and the park name meant something very different than it did now. June never interrupted a private dinner. That was a rule. So when Siwoo saw June walking toward the table with a tight jaw and hard eyes, he knew something was wrong. June leaned down next to Siwoo's ear and placed a phone face-up on the table, angled so only Siwoo could see it. On the screen was a document. It had a federal seal at the top. Below that, a photograph of Mary. Her hair was shorter in the picture, pulled back tight. She was wearing a blazer. She was not smiling. Next to the photo was a name, Mary Elaine Caldwell. Below that, a badge number. Below that, an agency designation, Organized Crime Task Force, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Los Angeles Field Office. And below that, a single line that made Siwoo's blood go cold. Mission objective: infiltrate and dismantle the Park Capital Group organization through sustained proximity to primary target Siwoo Park. Siwoo stared at the screen for exactly 4 seconds. Then he picked up the phone, slid it into June's hand under the table, and gave a small nod that meant later. June disappeared as quietly as he had arrived. Mary looked over at Siwoo. She had not seen any of it. She tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was reading him. Everything okay? Siwoo picked up his glass of water and took a sip. His hand trembled slightly, so he set the glass down before she could notice. He smiled at her, the same smile he had been giving her for 18 months, and said, "Just June being June. You know how he is." Mary rolled her eyes playfully. "That man needs a hobby." Siwoo laughed. It sounded real. It did not feel real. They finished dinner. Siwoo ordered her favorite dessert without her asking. He listened to her talk about a documentary she had watched about ocean conservation. He watched the way her hands moved when she got excited about something, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the way she reached across the table and touched his wrist like it was the most natural thing in the world. And the whole time, the ring sat in his pocket like a grenade. When they left the restaurant, Mary reached for his hand in the car. Siwoo let her take it. He wrapped his fingers around hers and held on, not because things were fine, but because he needed one more moment of pretending they were. The driver took them through the quiet streets of Beverly Hills. Mary leaned her head against his shoulder. She smelled like vanilla and something warm he could never quite name. She closed her eyes. She looked peaceful. Siwoo looked down at her and thought, "You were sent to destroy me, and I was about to give you my entire life." He did not sleep that night. Siwoo did not confront Mary the next morning. He did not confront her the morning after that either. That was not how he operated. Siwoo Park had not built a billion-dollar empire by reacting emotionally. He built it by being patient, strategic, and 10 steps ahead of everyone around him. He called June to his penthouse before sunrise the morning after the dinner. The Beverly Hills penthouse sat on the top floor of one of the most exclusive residential buildings on the West Side, a place where tech founders and retired athletes and old money lived side by side in polished silence. Siwoo stood by the window looking out at the city still covered in early morning fog. He had not changed out of his clothes from the night before. The ring box was sitting on his desk, open, the diamond catching the first weak light of dawn. June arrived within 20 minutes. He did not say anything when he walked in. He just stood near the door and waited because he could read Siwoo's energy the way a sailor reads the wind. Siwoo spoke without turning around. Pull everything, her full background, agency records, handler information, communication logs, how she was placed in my life. I want every single detail and I want it clean. No noise, no mess, nothing that can be traced back to us. June nodded. How far back? All the way. June left. Within 48 hours, he delivered a full dossier to Siwoo's desk. Mary Elaine Caldwell, born in Atlanta, Georgia, raised by a single mother who worked as a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital. Mary had been a straight-A student her entire life. She earned a full scholarship to Howard University, where she graduated top of her class with a degree in criminal justice. She was recruited by the FBI during her senior year and moved through the ranks with unusual speed. She was sharp, disciplined, and naturally gifted at reading people. By 27, she was one of the youngest agents assigned to the Organized Crime Task Force. Her handler was a senior agent named Craig Dutton. Siwoo read the name twice and committed it to memory. Craig Dutton, 51 years old, 15 years with the task force, based out of the Los Angeles field office. Craig had a reputation for being relentless, obsessive, and politically motivated. He had spent the last decade trying to take down Korean-American business networks on the West Coast, convinced that legitimate enterprises were fronts for underground operations. He had tried and failed 3 times before. Each failure had cost him credibility, promotions, and respect within the bureau. When Siwoo took over the Park family organization and began transitioning everything to legitimate business, Craig saw his shot at redemption. He handpicked Mary for the assignment because she was his best agent and because he believed her warmth and beauty would make her the perfect way in. The dossier laid out how Mary entered Siwoo's life. It was not an accident. 18 months ago, Park Capital Group held an investor mixer at a rooftop venue in Palo Alto. It was an exclusive event, invitation only, limited to about 60 people. Mary was placed on the guest list under a cover identity as a venture capital associate from a boutique firm in San Francisco. She was seated strategically near Siwoo's group. Her first interaction with him, a casual comment about a piece of art on the wall, was rehearsed. Siwoo read that detail and felt his chest tighten. He remembered that moment perfectly. She had said the painting looked like someone had tried to capture loneliness and accidentally made it beautiful. He had turned to look at her, and something in her eyes had stopped him. He had thought it was fate. It was an assignment. But then June showed him something else, something that complicated everything. June had managed to access Mary's internal reports, the ones she filed with Craig Dutton on a regular basis. In the beginning, the reports were clinical and professional. She described Siwoo's business operations, his associates, his routines. She noted details about Park Capital Group's structure. But as the months went on, the tone shifted. Mary began writing, in clear and direct language, that she was finding no evidence of illegal activity. She stated that Siwoo's businesses appeared to be fully legitimate. She noted that his financial records were clean and transparent. She recommended, more than once, that the case be closed and resources redirected elsewhere. Craig rejected every recommendation. His responses were short and dismissive. Keep going, dig deeper. You are not looking hard enough. In her most recent report, filed just 3 weeks ago, Mary wrote, "There is no case here. Continued surveillance is a waste of federal resources and raises serious ethical concerns. I am formally recommending closure for the 4th time. Craig's response, recommendation denied, maintain position. Siwoo read that line several times. She tried to end it. She told them he was clean, and they would not let her walk away. It did not erase the lie. Nothing could erase the lie, but it added a layer of something that Siwoo was not prepared for. Complexity, nuance, the possibility that Mary Caldwell was not just an agent doing her job. She was an agent fighting her own people on his behalf. He closed the dossier and sat in silence for a long time. Meanwhile, Mary was in her apartment in Santa Monica, lying on her bed and staring at the ceiling. She had a check-in call with Craig scheduled for 9 in the morning, and she was dreading it. Every call with Craig had become a battle. He pushed harder. She pushed back, and the space between them was shrinking. She rolled over and picked up her phone. Her text thread with Siwoo was open. The last message was from him, sent after he dropped her off the night before. "Get home safe. Good night, Mary." Simple, warm, the way he always was. She typed a reply. "Good morning, thinking about you." She stared at the words, then deleted them. She could not keep doing this. She could not keep being two people. The agent who was supposed to bring him down, and the woman who had fallen in love with him so deeply it scared her. Because she had fallen in love with him. That was the truth she could not report. It had happened slowly at first, then all at once. Siwoo was not what she expected when she took the assignment. She expected arrogance, coldness, someone who treated people like chess pieces. Instead, she found a man who remembered that she mentioned her mother's birthday in passing and sent flowers to Atlanta without being asked. A man who listened more than he talked. A man who never once tried to impress her with his wealth, and instead impressed her with his attention. She was in too deep, and she could not find her way out. The next evening, Siwoo and Mary met for dinner at a Korean restaurant in Koreatown, a place Siwoo had been going to since he was a kid. It was not fancy. It was authentic. The kind of place where the owner greeted Siwoo by name and brought extra banchan without being asked. They sat across from each other, and Mary noticed something immediately. Siwoo was different. He was still attentive, still present, but there was a wall behind his eyes that had not been there before. A distance she could feel but could not name. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Hey, talk to me. Something is off." Siwoo looked at her hand on his. Her fingers were slender. Her nails were short and unpainted. He knew those hands. He knew how they felt on his face when she kissed him. He knew how they felt intertwined with his own when they walked through the city at night. And now he knew those same hands had typed reports about him to a federal handler. He pulled his hand back gently, not abruptly, just enough to create space. "I have been thinking a lot lately about trust," he said. "About how you really know if someone is in your life for the right reasons. How you know what is real and what is just convenient." Mary's stomach dropped. She felt a cold wave move through her body, the kind of chill that has nothing to do with temperature. She searched his face for a clue, a sign of what he knew, but Siwoo's expression was unreadable. She forced a smile. "That is deep for a Tuesday night." He did not smile back. "Maybe." The rest of the dinner was quiet. Not uncomfortable, but not easy either. Something had shifted between them, and Mary could feel it like a crack in glass. Barely visible, but spreading. When Siwoo dropped her off that night, he did not walk her to her door the way he usually did. He stayed in the car. Mary stood on the sidewalk and looked back at him through the window. He raised his hand slightly. She raised hers. Then the car pulled away. Mary stood there on the sidewalk in the cool night air and felt something she had been running from for months. Fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from danger. The kind that comes from knowing you are about to lose something you never deserved to have in the first place. Craig Dutton was not a good man pretending to be one. He was a bitter man pretending to be righteous. 10 years earlier, Craig had led a major operation against a Korean business syndicate operating out of San Francisco. He had spent 2 years building the case, investing resources, pulling surveillance, pressuring informants. When the raid finally happened, it fell apart within hours. Insufficient evidence, procedural violations. The case was thrown out before it even reached a courtroom. 2 agents on Craig's team were reassigned as punishment. Craig's promotion to assistant director was delayed by 5 years. The failure became a stain on his career that he could not scrub clean no matter how hard he tried. Siwoo's father had been loosely connected to the people Craig failed to bring down. Not directly involved, but in the same orbit. So when Siwoo rose to prominence after his father's death and built Park Capital Group into a legitimate powerhouse, Craig did not see a young man who had turned his family's legacy around. He saw unfinished business. He saw the son of a man who had embarrassed him by association. And he saw his last chance at redemption before retirement. Craig did not care that Siwoo had gone legitimate. In Craig's mind, blood was blood. The apple did not fall far from the tree. And if the evidence did not exist, well, sometimes you had to help the evidence along. That was the mindset that brought him to the meeting with Mary. Craig called Mary into a nondescript office building in downtown Los Angeles. No signage on the outside. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of place that looked like it had been designed to drain the life out of anyone who walked in. Mary arrived in casual clothes, jeans, and a jacket, because she was technically supposed to be maintaining her cover and could not be seen walking into anything that looked federal. Craig was not alone. Sitting next to him was a younger agent named Trask. Late 20s, clean-cut, hungry eyes. The kind of agent who wanted to make a name for himself and did not care much about how he did it. Craig got straight to the point. He told Mary the timeline had moved up. The Bureau was under political pressure to show results on organized crime cases, especially cases involving high-profile business figures. Washington wanted wins, and Siwoo Park was supposed to be one of those wins. Mary pushed back immediately. She sat forward in her chair and spoke with the kind of directness that had earned her respect throughout her career. Craig, I have told you this multiple times. There is nothing to prosecute. Park Capital Group is a legitimate company. I have been inside his world for a year and a half. I have seen his financials. I have seen his operations. He is clean. Craig did not blink. He said, "Then we need to look harder." Mary shook her head. "There is nothing to find. I am not going to manufacture a case out of thin air." Craig leaned forward. His voice dropped low, the way it always did when he was about to say something he knew was wrong. "I am not asking you to manufacture anything. I am asking you to place a monitoring device in his home office, a small transmitter. It will capture his private communications. Phone calls, conversations with associates, anything he says when he thinks no one is listening." Mary stared at him. "You want me to bug his home?" "I want you to do your job." "My job is to investigate, not to entrap. If there is no evidence of criminal activity, we do not have grounds for that kind of surveillance. You know that." Craig's expression hardened. "Let me be clear about something, Agent Caldwell. You have been on this assignment for 18 months. In that time, you have produced nothing actionable. Nothing. If I wanted to, I could pull you off this case today and write in my report that you became emotionally compromised and failed to execute your mission. Do you understand what that would mean for your career?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mary felt the blood drain from her face. Emotionally compromised, those 2 words could end everything. Her clearance, her badge, her entire future. And the worst part was Craig was not entirely wrong. She had become emotionally compromised. She had fallen in love with the target, but that did not change the fact that there was no case. She stood up slowly. "I am not planting anything in his home. File whatever report you want." She walked out. Craig watched her go, then turned to Trask. "Start preparing a secondary approach. If she will not do it, we find another way in." Trask nodded eagerly. He had been waiting for his shot. Mary sat in her car in the parking garage for 15 minutes without starting the engine. Her hands were shaking. She was not shaking because of Craig's threat. She was shaking because she had just realized something with absolute clarity. She was willing to lose her career to protect Siwoo. Not because it was the right thing to do professionally, but because she loved him. And that love had become bigger than the mission, bigger than the badge, bigger than everything she had spent her life building. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and whispered, "What have I got myself into?" On the other side of town, Siwoo was having a very different kind of meeting. He had brought in his personal attorney, Dennis Yoon. Dennis was a 40-year-old Korean-American lawyer who operated out of Park Capital Group's Manhattan office, but had flown in the moment Siwoo called. Dennis was sharp, meticulous, and fiercely loyal. He had handled the legal side of Siwoo's transition from his father's shadow operations to full legitimacy, and he knew where every dollar in Park Capital Group came from and where every dollar went. Siwoo told Dennis everything about Mary, about her identity, about the federal investigation. Dennis listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When Siwoo finished, Dennis was quiet for a moment, then said something Siwoo did not expect. "They have nothing on you, Siwoo. You know that, I know that. But if they are running a case with no evidence and pressuring an agent to fabricate cause, that is not just incompetence. That is a civil rights violation. That is prosecutorial misconduct. If we can prove it, we do not just beat this case. We bury it permanently." Siwoo nodded slowly. "Start building a file, quietly." Dennis flew back to Manhattan that night and began working. Siwoo also made one more decision. He told June, "I am not cutting her off yet." June's face tightened. "Why not?" "Because I need to know which side she is on. If she is still working for them, I need to know now. And if she is not..." Siwoo paused. "If she is not, then I need to know that too." June shook his head. "This is dangerous, not the business kind of dangerous, the kind that breaks people." Siwoo said nothing. That night, Mary showed up at Siwoo's penthouse unannounced. She did not call first. She just appeared at his door looking like she had been through a war no one could see. Her eyes were red but dry. Her jaw was set, but her hands were restless at her sides. She was holding herself together the way people do when they are one honest question away from falling apart. Siwoo opened the door and looked at her. For a moment, everything he knew, the dossier, the mission briefing, the badge number, it all faded. All he saw was the woman he loved, standing in his doorway, carrying a weight she could not share. She did not explain why she was there. She just stepped forward and pressed her face against his chest. Siwoo stood still for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her. She did not cry. She just held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that was shifting under her feet. They stood there in the doorway for a long time. Neither of them spoke. The city hummed below them. The night air was cool and still. And Siwoo thought, if she is playing me, she deserves an award. But if she is not, then she is just as trapped as I am. And I am holding the one person in the world who might understand what that feels like. Siwoo needed certainty, not the kind that came from documents or dossiers or second-hand intelligence. He needed to know, from Mary's own actions, whether she was still reporting on him, whether the woman who showed up at his door and buried her face in his chest was real or rehearsed. He needed proof he could feel, not just read. So he set a trap. It was a Saturday morning. Mary had stayed the night, the way she sometimes did, falling asleep on his couch after they watched a movie and waking up wrapped in the blanket he always draped over her. She padded into the kitchen in one of his old t-shirts, her curly hair wild and untamed from sleep, and Siwoo thought for the 100th time that she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It made the whole situation worse. He made breakfast, Korean-style eggs, rice, kimchi, and coffee. They sat at the kitchen island like two normal people on a normal morning, and Siwoo delivered the bait with the casual precision of someone who had been negotiating billion-dollar deals since his 20s. "Something big is happening next month," he said, sipping his coffee. "We are acquiring a chain of private banks across Scottsdale, 3 locations. It is going to be the largest private banking acquisition Park Capital has ever done. The numbers are significant. We are talking about moving a lot of capital through Arizona." He gave her specifics, names of the banks, which were fabricated, a timeline, dollar amounts, the kind of granular financial detail that would make a federal agent's pulse quicken, the kind of information Craig Dutton had been begging Mary to deliver for 18 months. Mary listened. She nodded. She asked a couple of polite questions the way any girlfriend would when her partner talked about work. But Siwoo watched her eyes. He watched her hands. He watched for the micro-expressions that most people could hide from strangers, but not from someone who loved them. She did not react the way an active agent would. There was no subtle shift in attention, no sharpening of focus, no moment where her eyes flickered with the recognition that this was actionable intelligence. She listened the way a woman listens to the man she loves talk about his day. Then she changed the subject to a restaurant she wanted to try in Malibu. But Siwoo knew that how she listened was not the real test. The real test was what she did when she left. After breakfast, Mary kissed him, grabbed her bag, and headed out. Siwoo watched her car pull away from the building, and then he called June. The information has been delivered. Monitor Dutton's team. If they start pulling financial records on the banks I mentioned, if there is any federal movement towards Scottsdale, any inquiries, any shifts in their investigation, I want to know within the hour. June confirmed and went to work. Mary drove back to Santa Monica with the windows down and the radio off. Her mind was not on Siwoo's business deal. Her mind was on Craig. She had a follow-up call with him scheduled for Monday, and she already knew how it was going to go. Craig would demand updates. She would have nothing to give. He would threaten her again. Except now she did have something to give. Siwoo had just handed her exactly the kind of detail Craig had been starving for. A major financial acquisition. Private banks. Large capital movement. It was not evidence of wrongdoing, but Craig would not care about that. Craig would take the information and twist it into whatever shape he needed. He would use it to justify expanded surveillance. He would use it to convince the Bureau that Siwoo was making moves, big moves, and that the investigation needed to continue. This could save her career. One phone call, one message. That was all it would take to get Craig off her back, buy herself time, and keep her badge. Mary pulled into her apartment parking garage and sat in her car. She picked up her phone. She opened her message thread with Craig. She typed, "New intel. Target disclosed major financial acquisition. Private banking chain in Scottsdale, AZ, 3 locations. Significant capital movement planned for next month." She read the message back to herself. Then she deleted it. She typed it again, read it again, deleted it again. She did this 3 times. Each time her thumb hovered over the send button. Each time she pulled it back. On the 4th try, she did not type anything at all. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes. She could not do it. She could not hand Siwoo over. Not for Craig, not for the Bureau, not for her career, not for anything. She picked up the phone one final time and called Craig directly. When he answered, she said, "I have nothing new." Craig's voice went cold. "Nothing. 18 months, and you have nothing. I have told you repeatedly that there is no case. The target operates a legitimate business. There is nothing to find because there is nothing there." Craig's response was a controlled explosion. He called her a liability. He told her she had lost her objectivity. He told her Agent Trask was being briefed to take over the case, and that Mary had one final week to produce actionable intelligence or she was done. Not reassigned. Done. Mary hung up the phone, set it on the kitchen counter, and cried. Not because of Craig, not because of the threat to her career. She cried because she had just chosen Siwoo over everything she had built since college, over her badge, her reputation, her identity, and he did not even know it. He had no idea what she had just given up to protect him, and she could never tell him. 3 days later, June delivered his report to Siwoo. No movement from the feds on Scottsdale. No inquiries into the banks you mentioned. No changes in the task force's activity. Nothing. Siwoo sat with the information in his study for over an hour. He turned it over in his mind from every angle. She did not pass along the information. She had been handed the exact thing her handler needed, the thing that could have saved her career, and she kept it to herself. She chose him. He opened the ring box on his desk and looked at the diamond for a long time. Then he closed it and put it in his drawer. She had chosen him, but the lie was still there. The foundation of everything they had was still cracked. She came into his life as an assignment. Every early conversation, every first touch, every first kiss was built on deception. Even if her feelings were real now, the origin was not. Siwoo was caught between 2 truths that could not live in the same house. She lied to get close to him, and she chose him when it cost her everything. He did not know what to do with both of those things being true at the same time. Siwoo could not carry it anymore. The weight of knowing was heavier than the weight of not knowing, and it was suffocating him slowly every time Mary smiled at him, every time she touched him, every time she said his name like it was the safest word in her vocabulary. He needed the truth out in the open, not the truth he had uncovered through dossiers and surveillance reports. The truth from her mouth. He needed to hear her say it. He invited Mary to his private office at Park Capital Group's headquarters on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. The building was a sleek glass tower that Siwoo had purchased and renovated 3 years ago. His office was on the top floor, corner unit, with a view that stretched from downtown to the Pacific. It was the room where he made decisions that moved markets. And now it was going to be the room where his personal life either survived or ended. When Mary arrived, the floor was empty. No assistants at the front desk, no meetings on the calendar, no associates walking the halls, just silence and sunlight and the faint hum of the city 30 floors below. Siwoo was standing by the window with his back to the door when she walked in. He did not turn around. He heard her heels on the polished concrete floor. He heard her bag settle onto a chair. He heard her breathing. "Hey," she said. "You sounded serious on the phone. What is going on?" He did not turn around. He spoke toward the glass. "How long were you going to wait before you told me?" The room changed. The air changed. Mary felt it immediately, the way you feel a storm coming before you see a single cloud. "Told you what?" she asked, but her voice was already different, thinner, careful. Siwoo turned slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were a wreck. He walked to his desk, picked up a folder, and slid it across the surface toward her. Mary looked at the folder. She did not move for a moment. Then she stepped forward and opened it. Her own face stared back at her from a federal profile document. Her badge number, her agency designation, her handler's name, her mission objective in black and white. The color drained from Mary's face in real time. Her knees went soft, and she grabbed the edge of a chair to keep herself upright. She stared at the documents like they were a living thing that had bitten her. For 30 seconds, the office was completely silent. The kind of silence that has its own sound. Then Mary whispered, "Siwoo, let me explain." He cut her off, not with shouting. Siwoo never shouted. His voice dropped low and controlled, and somehow that was worse. 18 months, Mary. You have been in my life for 18 months on an assignment. Every dinner. Every morning at my kitchen island. Every time you fell asleep on my couch. Every time you told me something about your childhood or your mother or your dreams. You were reporting back to someone. You were documenting my life and sending it to a man named Craig Dutton so he could use it to destroy me. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. Not yet. "There is no case, Siwoo. There was never a case. I told Craig that over and over. I told him you were clean. I recommended closing the investigation 4 times. He refused every single time. He would not let me walk away." Siwoo's jaw tightened. "But you still stayed. Even after they ignored your recommendation, you stayed. You stayed in my life under false pretenses. You let me fall in love with you. You let me plan a future with you. You let me carry a ring in my pocket for 3 weeks thinking I had found the person I was going to spend my life with. And the whole time, you were someone else." That hit Mary like a physical blow. A ring. He had been carrying a ring. She pressed her hand against her mouth and the tears broke free. They ran down her cheeks in clean, silent lines. "She is not someone else," Mary said, her voice cracking but holding. "The woman you know, the woman who loves you, that is me. That is the real me. The mission stopped being real for me a long time ago. You became real. Everything I feel for you is real." Siwoo stared at her. His chest was rising and falling harder than he wanted it to. "How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to trust a single word that comes out of your mouth when the first word you ever said to me was part of a script?" Mary stepped toward him. "Because 3 days ago you told me about Scottsdale, about the private banks, about the acquisition. And I know that was a test, Siwoo. I am not stupid. I knew the moment you said it. And I did not send a word to Craig. I did not report it. I did not file it. He called me and I told him I had nothing. I chose you. I have been choosing you over my own career, over my own badge, over my own future for months. The room went still again. Siwoo looked at her for a long time. He wanted to cross the room. He wanted to hold her. He wanted to go back to the version of his life where he did not know any of this. But he could not do any of those things because trust, once shattered, does not get rebuilt with a single conversation. It gets rebuilt brick by brick, over time, with consistency and proof. And right now all he had was a broken foundation and a woman standing in front of him with tears on her face and truth in her eyes. He said, "I need you to leave." Mary nodded. She did not argue. She did not beg. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle and said, without turning around, "I am sorry. Not because I got caught, because I did not tell you sooner. You deserved better than this." Then she walked out. Siwoo stood alone in his office for a very long time after she left. The city moved below him. The light shifted across the floor. And the quiet dignity with which Mary had walked out of that room gutted him more than anything she could have said. Because people who are lying fight to stay. People who are telling the truth accept the consequences and walk away. And Mary had walked away. Craig Dutton did not wait for Mary's week to expire. He moved on his own timeline, and his timeline was now. With Mary effectively sidelined, Craig reassigned the case to Agent Trask with new directives. But Craig was not interested in a legitimate investigation anymore. He had spent too many years on this. He had invested too much of his reputation. He needed a result, and he was going to get one by any means necessary. Craig began pulling old financial records from Siwoo's father's era, transactions from over a decade ago, wire transfers between accounts that had been closed for years, business arrangements that predated Siwoo's involvement in the family organization. None of it was connected to Siwoo directly. None of it reflected how Park Capital Group currently operated, but Craig did not need a direct connection. He needed a narrative, and the narrative he built was simple. Siwoo Park inherited illegal funds from his father's operation and used those funds to seed Park Capital Group. Therefore, the entire company was built on dirty money, and every dollar it generated was tainted. It was circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst, but Craig knew that in the right hands, with the right political pressure, it could be enough to freeze Siwoo's assets, drag him into federal court, and destroy his reputation through the process alone. Even if Siwoo was eventually cleared, the damage would be done. Investors would flee. Partnerships would dissolve. The park name would be stained. Craig also made a personal move against Mary. He filed an internal report with the Office of Professional Responsibility, alleging that Agent Mary Caldwell had become romantically involved with her target and had compromised the integrity of the investigation. He included details, some accurate, some exaggerated, that painted Mary as an agent who had lost control of her assignment and allowed personal feelings to override professional duty. The report triggered an immediate internal review. Mary was called into the Lowe's Angels field office on a Tuesday morning, escorted into a conference room by two agents she had never met, and informed that she was being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the review. They took her badge. They took her service weapon. They revoked her access to all federal systems. Mary stood outside the field office afterward, holding a manila envelope with her suspension paperwork, and felt the ground disappear beneath her. She had given 10 years of her life to this agency, 10 years of sacrifice, discipline, and service. And Craig Dutton had ended it with a single report because she refused to fabricate evidence against an innocent man. She had nothing now, no badge, no career, no Siwoo. She went home to her Santa Monica apartment and sat on her couch in the dark. She thought about calling her mother in Atlanta, but she could not imagine explaining any of this. How do you tell your mother that you fell in love with the man you were assigned to investigate, and now you have lost both the man and the job? Then her phone buzzed, a news alert. She looked at the screen and her blood went ice cold. The headline read, "Federal investigation targets Park Capital Group. Billionaire Siwoo Park under scrutiny for financial irregularities." Craig had leaked the investigation to the press. The story was everywhere. Every financial news outlet, every major network, every social media platform. Siwoo's name was being dragged through public mud before a single charge had been filed, before a single piece of real evidence had been presented. Mary felt physically sick. She knew exactly what Craig was doing. He was using public pressure to force the case forward. Once the media was involved, the Bureau would have no choice but to pursue it aggressively, regardless of the evidence, because walking it back would be an admission that they had leaked a baseless investigation. Craig had created a trap that ensnared everyone. On the other side of the city, Siwoo was in full crisis mode. His phone had not stopped ringing since the story broke. Investors in Manhattan were calling, demanding explanations. Business partners in Scottsdale were threatening to pull out of joint ventures. 2 banks that were financing developments had already called Dennis Yoon requesting meetings to discuss the status of their loans. Park Capital Group's stock in its publicly traded subsidiaries dropped 4% in a single day. June was fielding calls nonstop, his voice tight with controlled fury. Dennis Yoon was on a plane from Manhattan, already drafting legal responses midair. Siwoo's PR team was scrambling to put together a statement. Siwoo stood in the middle of the chaos like a stone in a river. Everything moved around him, but he did not move. He had spent 8 years cleaning up his father's legacy. 8 years building something legitimate, something he could be proud of, something that proved the park name could mean more than what it used to mean. And now a bitter federal agent with a vendetta was trying to tear it all down with fabricated narratives and strategic leaks. He turned to June and said, "They have nothing because there is nothing, but they are going to try to bury me in process. Legal fees, frozen accounts, public perception, death by 1,000 cuts." He paused. "We are not playing defense anymore, we are going on offense." Dennis Yoon arrived that evening and immediately began preparing a counter-strategy. But he told Siwoo directly, "To win this, we need someone who can testify to the internal corruption of the task force. Someone who was on the inside, who saw Craig fabricate this case, who can prove that the investigation was never based on evidence." Siwoo knew exactly who that person was, and the thought of reaching out to her felt like swallowing glass. Mary did not wait for Siwoo to come to her. She watched the news coverage from her apartment for 2 days, each headline more damaging than the last, and she made her decision. She called Dennis Yoon directly. She found his number through the Park Capital Group website and left a voicemail that was short and precise. "My name is Mary Caldwell. I was the lead agent assigned to the investigation of Siwoo Park. I have 18 months of internal documentation that proves this case was fabricated by Senior Agent Craig Dutton. I have filed reports, communication records, and evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. I am willing to provide all of it. Call me back." Dennis called her back within the hour. He listened to everything she had to say, asked precise questions, and then told her he needed to speak with Siwoo. When Dennis presented the situation to Siwoo, the room went quiet. June was against it immediately. "She is still a federal agent," he said. "Suspended or not, this could be another play. Maybe Craig sent her to feed us bad information. Maybe this is the trap." Siwoo shook his head slowly. "She lost her badge, June. She lost her career. Craig filed a report that will follow her for the rest of her professional life. She has nothing left to play for." June was not convinced. People do desperate things when they have nothing left. Siwoo looked out the window for a long time. The city spread out below him, indifferent to the mess his life had become. Then he said, "Set up a meeting." They met in Dennis Yoon's temporary office in Los Angeles, a rented conference room in Century City with no windows and a long wooden table. Siwoo arrived first. He sat at one end of the table and waited. June stood by the door like a sentinel. Dennis organized his files. When Mary walked in, the air in the room changed the way it always did when she was near Siwoo. She looked different. The confidence that had always defined her was dimmer. There were shadows under her eyes. She was wearing jeans and a plain white blouse, no jewelry, no pretense. She looked stripped down to her essence, and somehow that made her more real than she had ever been. She sat at the opposite end of the table from Siwoo. They looked at each other across 12 feet of polished wood in silence. Mary spoke first. She did not start with an apology or a plea. She started with the evidence. She opened a folder she had brought and laid out 18 months of documentation. Every report she filed with Craig, every recommendation to close the case, every rejection from Craig demanding she continue, transcripts of phone calls, the recorded conversation where Craig said, "Then we make one," when Mary told him there was no evidence, the order to plant a surveillance device in Siwoo's home. Her refusal, Craig's subsequent threat. Dennis reviewed each document carefully. His face grew more intense with every page. By the time he finished, his hands were flat on the table and his jaw was set. "This is extraordinary," he said, almost to himself. "This is not just enough to get the case dismissed. This is enough to bring formal misconduct charges against Dutton. This could end his career." Mary nodded. "That is why I am here." Siwoo had not spoken a word through the entire presentation. He had watched Mary's hands as she laid out the documents. He had watched her face as she described what Craig had done. He had listened to the steadiness in her voice, the kind of steadiness that came not from confidence but from conviction. When the room went quiet, Mary looked directly at him. "I am not doing this to win you back, Siwoo. I know I might never get that chance. I am doing this because what they are doing to you is wrong. And I am not going to let the worst thing I ever did, lying to you, turn into the worst thing they ever do, destroying you. You are a good man. You do not deserve what is happening, and I have the power to stop it." Siwoo held her gaze for a long moment. The anger was still there, buried deep, but something else was rising above it. Respect, and something dangerously close to love that he was not ready to name. He said simply, "Thank you." 2 words. But the way he said them, low and quiet and heavy with everything he could not say yet, carried the weight of 1,000. Over the next 2 weeks, the 3 of them worked together intensely. Mary walked Dennis through the internal structure of the task force, Craig's patterns, his history of targeting Korean-American businessmen, the political pressures driving the case. Siwoo provided full financial transparency, opening every account, every transaction record, every deal Park Capital Group had ever executed. Dennis built the counter case brick by brick. During those 2 weeks, Siwoo and Mary were in the same room almost every day. They were professional, focused, disciplined, but the proximity was its own kind of torture. There were moments that neither of them acknowledged but both of them felt. A hand that brushed against the other when reaching for the same document. A look that lasted 2 seconds longer than necessary. The way Siwoo brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it without asking, because he still remembered, because some things do not get erased by betrayal. One evening, after a particularly long session, everyone else had left the office. Mary was packing up her files, and Siwoo was still sitting at the table reviewing documents. She paused at the door and said, "For what it is worth, the best version of myself only existed when I was with you. I did not know who she was before. I would like to find her again someday." She left before he could respond. Siwoo stared at the closed door and felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, thawing. Dennis Yoon filed the countersuit on a Monday morning. It was a legal bomb, meticulously constructed and devastating in its precision. The suit was filed in federal court and named Craig Dutton specifically, along with the Organized Crime Task Force and relevant oversight bodies. The allegations were damning. Prosecutorial misconduct, fabrication of evidence, unlawful surveillance requests, violation of civil rights protections, retaliation against a whistleblowing agent, and intentional destruction of a private citizen's reputation through unauthorized media leaks. The filing hit the legal world like an earthquake. Within hours, every major news outlet that had run the story about Siwoo being under investigation was now running a very different story. Simultaneously, Siwoo's media team executed a strategy that Noel Baptiste, his head of communications, had been preparing for days. Noel was a sharp, no-nonsense strategist from Chicago who had spent a decade managing crisis communications for Fortune 500 companies. She understood that in the modern world, perception moved faster than prosecution, and whoever controlled the narrative won. On Noel's direction, Park Capital Group released Siwoo's complete financial records publicly. Every transaction, every investment, every deal, every tax filing. All of it clean, transparent, and traceable. The release was accompanied by a written statement from Dennis Yoon outlining how the federal investigation was initiated without evidence, sustained through pressure and fabrication, and leaked to the media as a deliberate act of career-motivated destruction by a single agent. The transparency was devastating to Craig's case. Financial analysts and journalists who reviewed the records could not find a single irregularity. Every dollar was accounted for. Every business was legitimate. Every claim Craig had made or implied was contradicted by the actual numbers. The public narrative flipped overnight. Siwoo Park went from being a suspected criminal to being a victim of government overreach. Social media erupted with support. Legal commentators called the countersuit one of the most aggressive and well-documented misconduct cases they had ever seen. Investors who had distanced themselves started calling back. Craig Dutton was summoned for an emergency internal review at the Department of Justice. He walked into a room with 5 senior officials and a recording device on the table. The recorded phone call, the one where he told Mary, "Then we make one," was played in full. His falsified reports were laid out chronologically. His pattern of targeting Korean-American businessmen with insufficient evidence was presented as a documented history of bias. Mary's reports recommending closure were placed next to Craig's rejections, side by side, showing a clear pattern of an agent overriding legitimate findings to pursue a personal vendetta. Craig tried to defend himself. He leaned forward in his chair and attacked Mary's credibility. He argued that she had become romantically involved with the target and that her testimony was unreliable because of emotional compromise. But Dennis had anticipated this. He had prepared a timeline that showed Mary's professional recommendations to close the case began months before her relationship with Siwoo became personal. The timeline proved that Mary's professional judgment came first and was consistent throughout, regardless of her personal feelings. Craig had no response. The room was silent for a long time after the evidence was presented. Then the lead official informed Craig that he was suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full investigation that would likely result in formal charges. Agent Trask, who had been following Craig's orders, cooperated fully with the review. He provided additional testimony confirming Craig's pressure tactics, his dismissal of contrary evidence, and his insistence on pursuing the case despite having no legitimate grounds. Mary was formally cleared by the internal review. Her record was restored. The allegations of misconduct were removed from her file. She was offered full reinstatement with a commendation for demonstrating integrity under extraordinary pressure. The federal case against Park Capital Group was dismissed with prejudice. The judge's written opinion stated that the investigation was initiated and sustained without evidentiary basis, and that the conduct of the supervising agent represented a serious breach of public trust. The dismissal with prejudice meant the case could never be brought again. Siwoo stood in Dennis Yoon's office reading the judge's decision. His hands were steady. His face was calm. But June, who had known him for 20 years, could see the emotion moving behind his eyes. "It is over," Dennis said. Siwoo nodded. "No, it is not over yet." Dennis looked at him, confused. Siwoo set down the document and said, "There is one more thing I need to do." Mary was offered everything back: her badge, her clearance, her position, a promotion to a supervisory role which was the Bureau's way of saying, "We are sorry," without actually saying it. She sat in the Lowe's Angels Field office, holding her credentials in her hands. The same badge she had carried for 10 years. The same weight, the same feel, the same gold shield that had once defined everything she was. She turned it over in her fingers and waited to feel something. Pride, relief, vindication. She felt nothing. Or rather, she felt clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes after you have lost everything and had to figure out who you are without it. The system she had given her life to had tried to use her as a weapon against an innocent man. When she refused, it punished her. When she fought back, it tried to discredit her. And now that the truth was out, it wanted to hand her back a badge and pretend none of it had happened. Mary set the credentials on the desk, looked at the senior agent who had offered them to her, and said, "No, thank you." The agent blinked. "Agent Caldwell, this is a full reinstatement with commendation. You are being offered a promotion. This is an acknowledgement of your integrity." Mary stood up. "My integrity does not need their acknowledgement. I know who I am, I know what I did, and I know what they tried to make me do. I am not going back." She walked out of the field office for the last time. The glass doors closed behind her and the California sun hit her face, and for the first time in 18 months she felt light. No mission, no cover, no double life, no handler calling her phone, no lying to the man she loved, just Mary, just herself. She went home and started packing. She had decided to move back to Atlanta. Her mother was there. Her roots were there. And she needed to be somewhere that felt like home while she figured out what the next chapter of her life looked like. She did not know what she was going to do for work. She did not know where she was going to live. She just knew she could not stay in Los Angeles, where every corner and every restaurant and every stretch of coastline reminded her of Siwoo. Her apartment was half in boxes when June called Siwoo. "She turned down the reinstatement," June said. He was standing in Siwoo's Beverly Hills penthouse, watching Siwoo sit on the terrace with 2 glasses of wine on the table. One for him. One for the empty chair across from him. Siwoo looked up. "What?" She turned down the badge, the promotion, everything. She walked away. "Why?" June paused. He was not a man given to sentimentality, but even he could recognize what was happening here. "Because she does not want to be the person they tried to make her. She wants to be the person she was when she was with you." Siwoo stared at June for a long time. Then he looked at the empty chair. Then he looked at the second glass of wine he had poured out of habit for a woman who was not there. He stood up. "Where is she?" he asked. "Santa Monica, packing. She is moving back to Atlanta." Siwoo picked up his keys and walked out without another word. He did not call his driver. He did not bring June. He did not bring anyone. He drove himself, which he almost never did, through the evening traffic on the 405 like a man who had finally stopped thinking and started feeling. Mary was tapping up a box of books when the knock came. She wiped the dust off her hands, pushed a strand of curly hair behind her ear, and opened the door. Siwoo was standing there. No entourage, no bodyguard, no polished corporate armor. Just a man in a simple black shirt and dark jeans, standing on her doorstep with his hands at his sides, and everything he felt written across his face in a language only she could read. "You turned down the badge," he said. She leaned against the doorframe. "Yeah. You were going to leave, move to Atlanta, without telling me. I did not think you wanted to hear from me." Siwoo looked past her at the boxes stacked against the walls. Her half-packed life. Her books and photographs and the small things that made up a person's world, all of it being put into cardboard because she thought there was nothing left for her here. He stepped inside without being invited, not aggressively, just naturally, the way he had always moved into her space, like he belonged there. "I spent 3 weeks trying to hate you," he said. His voice was low, not angry, not cold, just honest in a way that stripped everything down to its bones. "I tried to convince myself that everything we had was fake, that you were a performance, that every conversation, every morning, every time you fell asleep on my couch was just an agent doing her job." He paused. He looked at the floor, then back at her. "I could not do it, because the woman who refused to send that message to Craig, the woman who told her own agency there was no case when it would have been so much easier to lie, the woman who testified against her own people to protect someone they told her to destroy, the woman who just turned down her badge and her career because she refused to go back to a system that tried to use her." He stepped closer. "That woman is not fake. She is the most real person I have ever known. And I am not letting her pack up her life and disappear." Mary's eyes were filling up. She pressed her lips together and tried to hold it in, the way she always did, the way she had been doing for months. But it broke through anyway. A tear ran down her cheek, then another. "Siwoo, I lied to you, for months, every day. How do you get past that?" He said, "You lied to get in, but you told the truth when it mattered. And the truth cost you everything, your career, your badge, your reputation, your security. You gave up everything you had to do the right thing for me. That is how I know it is real, because lies are cheap. But what you did was the most expensive truth I have ever seen. Mary closed her eyes and let the tears come. She did not wipe them. She did not hide them. She just stood in her half-packed apartment and let herself feel the weight of being fully known and fully accepted by someone she thought she had lost forever. Siwoo reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small box. The same ring box he had been carrying that night at the rooftop restaurant, the night his world had split in two. He had kept it. Through the anger, through the investigation, through the lawsuit, through everything. He had never been able to put it away permanently because some part of him, the part that operated on something deeper than logic, had always known he would end up here. He opened the box. The diamond caught the light from the single lamp in Mary's living room, and it threw tiny fragments of brightness across the walls like a quiet celebration. Mary's hands went to her mouth. Her whole body went still. Siwoo said, "I was going to ask you that night, before June walked up, before the document, before any of it. And then I spent weeks being furious that I almost gave this ring to someone who was not real. But you are real, Mary. You are the most real thing in my life. And I do not want to spend another day pretending that what we have does not matter. It matters. You matter." He held the ring out toward her. "So I am asking you now, not the agent, not the cover, you, Mary Caldwell, will you marry me?" Mary looked at the ring. She looked at Siwoo. She looked at the boxes all around them, the evidence of a life she had been about to walk away from. And she realized that she had spent 18 months pretending to be someone she was not, and the only time she had ever truly been herself was standing right here, in front of this man, with nothing left to hide behind. She nodded. Then she said it out loud because he deserved to hear the word from her mouth without any pretense, without any cover story, without any mission objective attached to it. "Yes." Siwoo slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly because of course it did. He had paid attention to everything about her from the very beginning, the way she liked her coffee, the way she rubbed her left wrist when she was nervous, the size of her ring finger, all of it, because Siwoo Park did not love halfway. He pulled her into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her forehead against his. They stood there in the middle of her half-packed apartment with boxes all around them like the wreckage of two lives that had collided and nearly destroyed each other. But instead of wreckage, it felt like clearing. Like everything unnecessary had been stripped away, and what was left was the only thing that had ever mattered. Mary whispered against his lips, "I am done lying to everyone, including myself. I love you, Siwoo. I have loved you since before I was allowed to." Siwoo kissed her. Slowly, deliberately. The way you kiss someone when you have almost lost them, and you know exactly what that loss tastes like, and you have decided, with everything in you, that you will never taste it again. 6 months later, Siwoo and Mary stood together at the grand opening of Park Capital Group's newest development, a luxury mixed-use tower in Bellevue, Washington, a soaring glass and steel structure that would house premium residential units, retail spaces, and the West Coast headquarters of a tech company Siwoo had personally recruited as the anchor tenant. It was the biggest project Park Capital Group had ever completed, and it was built on clean money, transparent deals, and the reputation of a man who had stared down the full weight of the federal government and walked away standing. The event was packed. Investors, media, politicians, business partners from Manhattan to Scottsdale to Beverly Hills. June moved through the crowd with his usual quiet intensity, keeping everything running. Dennis Yoon stood near the bar, looking satisfied in a way that only lawyers who have won a truly righteous fight can look. Noel Baptiste was in her element, fielding media requests and making sure every camera angle told the story she wanted told. Mary stood at Siwoo's side, not behind him, not in his shadow, but beside him. She was wearing a deep emerald dress that caught the light every time she moved. The ring on her finger sparkled under the chandeliers. She was not hiding. She was not pretending to be anyone. She was Mary Caldwell, soon to be Mary Park, and everyone in that room knew exactly who she was and exactly how she had gotten there. She had started her own private security consulting firm 3 months earlier. Using her federal experience, her understanding of agency tactics, and her first-hand knowledge of how government overreach could target legitimate businesses, she had built a company that helped corporations protect themselves from exactly the kind of attacks Siwoo had faced. Her client list was already growing. Firms in Beverly Hills, Manhattan, Scottsdale, and Bellevue had signed on. She was turning her worst experience into her greatest weapon, and she was doing it on her own terms. Siwoo looked at her across the room during a quiet moment. She was talking to a group of investors, and she was holding her own, sharp, warm, commanding without being loud. He watched her the way he had watched her that very first night in Palo Alto when she had said the thing about the painting and loneliness. Except now, there were no secrets between them. No mission. No handler. No lies. Just the truth, messy and painful and beautiful in theirs. He walked over to her, put his hand on the small of her back, and leaned close to her ear. "You know, for someone who was sent to take me down, you did a terrible job." Mary turned to look at him. A slow smile spread across her face, the kind of smile that starts in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. "Or maybe I did the best job anyone has ever done. I just redefined the mission." Siwoo laughed. A real laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from a place that has been hurt and healed and is stronger for it. Mary leaned into him, and they stood together looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Bellevue skyline stretching into the Pacific Northwest evening. Craig Dutton was formally charged with prosecutorial misconduct, evidence fabrication, and abuse of authority. He was stripped of his credentials and barred from federal employment. He never worked in law enforcement again. Agent Trask cooperated fully with the investigation and was reassigned to a different division. He eventually became a quiet advocate for internal reform within the Bureau. Dennis Yoon was named one of the top litigators on the West Coast by 3 separate legal publications. He continued to serve as Siwoo's personal attorney and closest professional advisor. Jun Hyo never said he liked Mary out loud, but he started setting a place for her at every private dinner without being asked, which in Jun's language was the highest form of acceptance. Noel Baptiste received a promotion to Chief Communications Officer of Park Capital Group and went on to manage the media strategy for 3 more major developments. Mary Caldwell Park built her security consulting firm into one of the most respected in the country. She hired former federal agents who, like her, had seen the system from the inside and wanted to make sure it could never be weaponized against innocent people again. And Siwoo Park, the man the government tried to destroy, stood taller than he ever had. Not because he was powerful, not because he was wealthy, not because he had won, but because he had been given every reason to become bitter, every reason to close himself off, every reason to choose revenge over grace, and instead he chose love. He chose the woman who came into his life as a lie and became the most honest thing he had ever known. Some people would call that foolish. Siwoo called it the best decision he ever made. And Mary, the woman who had spent 18 months pretending to be someone she was not, finally got to live the rest of her life as exactly who she was. No cover, no mission, no double life. Just Mary, fully known, fully loved, fully free.